Before we get started today, we need to address decorum. Before we get started today, we need to address a few incidents that happened during yesterday's afternoon session. First and foremost, it takes a lot of guts to get up here and give a speech in front of hundreds of students. The only thing we ask is that you be respectful. Please refrain from disruptive behavior, such as playing on your phones or asking questions that do not pertain to the debate. If you are not interested in the debates, please show respect to your classmates and refrain from disruptive behavior. On behalf of the 2023-2024 IPLE class, we would like to take a moment and thank all of you for coming to today's debates. Before we continue on with the debates, we would like to remind all students to be respectful to the candidates and refrain from talking and using your phones and or any other distractions during the debates. The structure of today's debates will proceed in the following format. You will hear two debates today. The first will focus on enacting a presidential age restriction. The speakers will be Justin Ziering from the Snow Party and Bridget Skenyon from the Safari Party. The second debate will focus on banning alcoholics and drug abusers from receiving organ donations. The speakers in the debate will be Elizabeth Baxter from the Snow Party and Corinne Basile from the Safari Party. Each speaker will have a total of 7 minutes to speak and answer questions. After each speaker presents their speech, the opposing speaker will have the opportunity to ask one question. After both speakers present their arguments, the audience will be allowed to ask 2 questions. After both debates have been completed, we will open up the floor for questions from the audience.
Mr. Ziering, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Justin Ziering, and I, alongside my campaign manager, Rita Desai, am running for president with the Snow Party. I'm a natural-born American citizen, and I understand that it is my right, just as it is yours, and every other citizen's, to vote for who holds that office. We can vote for anyone we damn well please, so long as they are a natural-born citizen, have resided in this country for 14 years, and have lived for 35. While you or I may not agree with those established requirements, my opponent thinks we should add another one to that list. She thinks that we should add a cap to how old a presidential candidate can be. The way I see it, that's just taking away choices from the voters. If you like a candidate, if you like their policies, if you like their platform, then you should be able to vote for them. I can see no reason why putting this limitation in place would be seen as a good idea. It just doesn't make any sense. An age limit would remove eligibility from a large portion of the American populace. The oldness of a candidate shouldn't be a factor when you're considering their ability to serve. Section 621 of US Code prohibits any discrimination when it comes to hiring for any duties of any office, whether public or private. Section 621 of US Code prohibits any discrimination on the basis of age when it comes to hiring. Why would we have a government break one of the rules that it itself is meant to be enforcing? During our previous debate, my opponent stated that as people get older, their cognitive abilities decline. I would like to recognize that that is true for the average person, but we're not really talking about average people. Do we really want an average person running the most powerful country in the world? My opponent brought up Teddy Roosevelt and Jack Kennedy last debate. Roosevelt, when he became president, had already distinguished himself with a Harvard and Columbia education, as well as having served as Undersecretary of the Navy and Governor of New York. Jack Kennedy had already distinguished himself with service for his country in World War II and as a senator. These men were younger, but they weren't just the average person. They were exceptional, and it is exceptional people that we want in office. Now let's say there is a candidate who happens to be mentally insufficient for the office. There are safeguards in place to prevent that from crippling the country. There's the nominating process for each party, whereby a series of debates and political infighting happen in order for each party to choose their candidate for the election in November. This gauntlet of public debates and rigorous campaigning touring of even the most obscure of towns proves as a way to prove the mettle of any prospective nominee. It is then up to the voters, to you, in November, to decide who you like best. But if who you like best happens to be over the 70-year mark, that just won't be an option for you. And hey, let's say someone does get elected and they become mentally insufficient after the fact. There is a set line of succession in place, and there is a system for the cabinet to deem a president unable to execute the duties of his office and therefore relieve him of them. Speaking of the cabinet, wouldn't the entire line of succession have to have this limitation too? The most senior member of the Senate has traditionally been given the position of president pro tempore in honor and deference to their service. They're the fourth person in line to succeeding the president. So that tradition would have to be lost. Every Speaker of the House, every President pro tem, every cabinet secretary would have to be below the age of 70. Representation of an entire age demographic would just evaporate with the introduction of this limitation. What my opponent forgets is that the presidency isn't the Supreme Court. These people aren't in for life. The presidency is renewed every 4 years, so someone who doesn't turn out well can just be booted out the next cycle. The presidency is beholden, by virtue of our political system, to public opinion. And representation isn't an issue. While the presidency is, of course, the most visible, there still would be younger members of the cabinet. Young people would be represented in government, albeit not as visibly, but they would be there. And no matter how old any candidate for president is, if they want to stay in office, if they want to win that office, then they have to acknowledge youth issues, because guess what? Young people can vote. When it comes to age, life expectancy continues to increase. It's believed by some Harvard researchers that the first cohort to live over an average of 100 years has already been born. If this is true, if this trend does continue, then Americans would only have about the second third of their life to become president. There would be a narrow window of 35 years by which you would be able to become president. Continuing on the topic of life expectancy, women, statistically, live longer than men. If you set a limit on the age by which someone can become president, you would be making a larger number of women ineligible for the office than you would be men. If this age limit were put in place as of today, there would be 4,321,578 more women made ineligible for the office than there would be men. And I am certain that that number is going to increase as people live longer. The way I see it, this proposed cap on how old a presidential candidate can be is just a way to keep older citizens out of office. And you know what? If you don't like elderly politicians, just don't vote them in. It's our votes that make up the government. This proposal is just another way to create a schism in the electorate, to create a them against us. But we shouldn't be thinking that way, because they are us. They represent us because we're all Americans. All adding this limitation would do is further cause division. I guarantee you that the elderly vote would decline, apathy would increase, and elderly care will begin to decline, because elderly issues just won't be seen as important. And the people who are going to suffer for that are you. I can guarantee that almost everyone in this room will one day collect a Social Security check. You better pray it holds enough to support you in your older years. One way to ensure that it might is to make sure that the elderly voice is still heard today. Keep an America where we don't see each other by ages, but by content of character. Keep an America where we all see each other as Americans. Go all in with Justin and vote Snow.
Ms. Skenyon, you may ask your question.
Since you're against an age cap, what's your solution then to protect our country from a president who can't form a coherent sentence and to raise the youth voter turnout?
Okay, thank you for having an older president who maybe can't think sufficiently. That's still the voter's choice. If they vote him into office, then that's what happens. And again, the cabinet can remove him if he becomes too mentally insufficient. When it comes to youth voter turnout, I think it's mostly an issue of people don't understand that they have the ability to influence their government. Maybe if, say, there was a fourth required year of social studies or a civics class, then maybe there would be greater voter turnout because people would understand the ways in which they can influence their government, and that it's not just up to some old men in the government as of now. We have the power to remove them. We have the power to choose who we want, and I think it's necessary that we understand that as a people, as opposed to just saying older people can't earn that office.
Ms. Skenyon, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Bridget Skenyon, and I'm running alongside my campaign manager, Sarah George, for president in this year's elections. I'd like to start today by thanking my opponent for the promise he made to vote for me in the next presidential election. If you weren't able to see yesterday's debate, I asked my opponent if he didn't support the science behind an age maximum requirement, if he also did not in turn support a minimum requirement. He answered that he believes I should be able to run after graduation, and that he'd even vote for me. Unfortunately, even in Mr. Ziering's dream world where a 17-year-old or an 100-year-old can run for president, I don't plan to. This is because I respect Article 2 of the Constitution, where it outlines the minimum age requirement to run for president. Additionally, I understand that the presidency should be held by someone with peak cognitive abilities. I believe that our government should set a maximum age for a person running for president. The rule will be as follows. You cannot run at over 70 years old, and this rule will apply to the vice president as well. We have always had a minimum age requirement of 35 years old, so why is there no maximum age? It is past time for a change. The other party will claim that this is an ageist policy, but it is a fact that brain cognition declines with age. Studies have shown that a person's brain is fully developed and at its peak at age 35. Furthermore, the National Institute of Health tells us the average age for cognitive decline is 70. Based on these studies, the best age for a person to lead our country is from 35 to 70, and I propose exactly this. The presidency demands vitality and stamina to handle the rigorous responsibilities of leading this country. It requires the ability to think on the spot, to respond swiftly to crisis, and the cognitive ability to make decisions that will shape our nation. With the changing times, it is vital to have a president who can keep up with the technological advancements, global politics, and economic landscapes. By setting a maximum age for presidential candidates, we can ensure that our leaders are seasoned by experience and relatable to the younger generation that will inherit this world. How many of you feel like the topics brought up in presidential elections directly affect you? Probably not many of you. The national youth voter turnout in the last election was 23%, as stated in a research conducted by Tufts University. Could this be because the people running for president are old men making decisions that will favor them and their peers? Joe Biden graduated high school in 1961. That same year, people were being imprisoned for being gay. Donald Trump graduated in 1963. That same year, people marched in the streets advocating for civil rights. Do you think either of these old men can relate to us when they went to high school at a time when it was illegal to marry someone of a different race or gender, while segregation was the law of our land? A constantly evolving nation needs a leader who experiences these changes with us. We should have a president who will be around for the change that they are making and who truly understands what it's like to be part of the current times. Our government is so stacked with the elderly that the State of the Union address looks like a visiting day at an assisted living community. Never before have we seen a presidential election like this. 4 years ago, Joe Biden was the oldest president in history to be inaugurated, and he's only getting older. With our primary party candidates enjoying senior citizen discounts for over a decade, it's time for government intervention. At a bare minimum, I think we all believe that our elected officials must be able to problem solve, self-monitor, make plans, and have an open mind. These skills are known as executive functioning. Executive functioning also includes a wide range of cognitive abilities such as the ability to organize, reason, problem solve, and successfully engage in independent, appropriate, purposive, and self-serving behavior. However, according to the National Institute of Health, concept formation, abstraction, and mental flexibility all decline after the age of 70. Older adults tend to think more concretely than younger adults, meaning seniors are less accepting of societal changes that will determine our future. Executive abilities requiring a speeded motor component are particularly susceptible to age effects. Our nation has never experienced this problem at this scale before. The median age of presidents at inauguration is 55 years old. It saddens me that the first election I'll get to vote in is one between an 81-year-old man and a 77-year-old man. Yesterday, my opponent tried to mention Reagan as an argument against this age maximum requirement. He said he was an old, effective president. What Mr. Ziering didn't mention was that Reagan was under 70 at inauguration, meaning he would still be able to be president, even with the legislation I'm proposing. With this legislation, you can be over 70 for re-election, just not initial inauguration, which provides for a bigger window of opportunity to run for president than my opponent would like you to believe. Additionally, my opponent mentioned succession. He argued that the president pro tempore would be president, and what if he's over 70? Well, I'd like to remind you that the president pro tempore is fourth in line of succession. So if our president, vice president, and speaker of the House all die, I think we have bigger problems than age. This scenario has never happened before and should not prohibit this necessary legislation from passing. For these reasons, it is time for government intervention. It's time to pass legislation that prohibits people over the age of 70 from running for president. It's been a long time coming. There was already an age minimum requirement of 35, so it's time for a maximum. Based on cognitive studies, I believe the appropriate age limit is 70, also known as the age that the average brain starts to decline. It's a change that will be reasonably simple to implement, as there is already an age minimum in Article 2 of the Constitution. We just need to amend this to include an age maximum of 70. And this original age minimum was made when the life expectancy was 40 years old, so that's a much smaller window than the window that I'm proposing we have. In conclusion, it is a time for change. It's time to stop filling our government with the elderly. I hope in the future our government will represent us, the future of America. We must have a president who can think on the spot, who can have an open mind, and who has the cognitive ability to lead our nation. Don't take it from me, take it from science. Science has shown that a person's brain is best from 35 to 70. Our president should be this age, not older, not younger. So please, vote for me as president in this election. Vote for a better future, vote for the youth, vote Safari.
Mr. Ziering, you may ask your question.
Thank you. According to 538, a public polling branch of ABC, 42.1% of Americans think favorably of Trump and 40% think favorably of Biden. Why should these Americans not be given their choice for president?
So those are actually both incumbent presidents, so they have more resources, financial support, and respect within their parties, which gives them a leg up to younger candidates who are trying to move up the political ladder. This is exactly why I'd like to fix the system, so as it take until you're 80 years old to finally be your time to run for office.
We're going to take 2 questions from the audience.
Okay, my question's for the Snow Party. Hold on. So in your speech, you were talking about how some presidents are above average. What makes Donald Trump and Biden, the two older presidents, and Biden being the oldest, what makes them above average?
Thank you. Well, Biden, what makes him above average, makes him exceptional, is his years of service. And Trump has been able to completely just come in out of nowhere and completely just overhaul the political system. I'm not saying either one is good. I'm just saying that they aren't just your average person. They've been able to hold these offices, and they've been able to exercise their duties, their powers effectively. However you feel about either one of them, they're still executing the duties of their office, and they're still serving as presidents. No matter how old they are, they're still doing it, which is commendable, and it's not something that anyone could do. I'm certain that not any average 80-year-old could do those things. And that's about what I've got.
According to Teen Brain and 7 Things to Know, the average human brain develops fully at mid to late 20s. So are you suggesting that we should lower the age of when we can become president to mid to late 20s?
I'm guessing that's for the Safari Party. That's a great question, but I'm not here to debate the minimum requirement because that's already in the Constitution. I'd be open to lowering it to when the brain fully whatever, but the National Institute of the National Institute of Health, which is a government organization, actually said that 35 is when your brain is peaked. So maybe it's fully developed at 20, but you're at its peak at 35, which is why it's the minimum currently.
We're going to invite the next speakers up to the stage. Ms. Baxter, you have 7 minutes.
Raise your hand if you, your parent, or grandparent smokes or smoked cigarettes. I'll raise my hand. Perfect. Raise your hand if a family member has had a quote-unquote drinking problem. Raise your hand if you know someone who vapes. 46.8 million people suffer from substance abuse disorders in America each year. Think of the people you raised your hands for. By voting in the Safari Party, you're voting to ban alcoholics and addicts from even being considered for the organ reception list. You are killing those people. The laws we're talking about today affect your family and your friends. In today's debate, we are talking about nameless people. We are talking about someone's grandmother, sister, father, and possibly someone in this room in the future. My name is Elizabeth Baxter, and alongside my campaign manager, Porva Munjal, I am running for the House of Representatives with the Snow Party. Join us in the fight to save lives and ensure that every American gets a second chance. For those of you who were here yesterday, hi, welcome back. If this is your first time hearing this debate, it's great to have you here. Before I get into the nitty-gritty, I want to address some misconceptions that were brought up during yesterday's debate. The Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network, or OPTN, oversees the compensation and organization of the entire system. They work alongside a private, nonprofit organization called UNOS, who assists in the donation process. I'm sure that many of you have heard of UNOS from Grey's Anatomy or Chicago Med. Together, they organize the USA into 11 geographical regions. Shout out to our region, number 2. These regions are further divided into donation service areas, or DSAs. When an organ is available, UNOS first looks for matches in the DSA, then the region, and then the rest of the countries. The order of priority for organs is based on medical urgency. This is all important. When organ donation first started, the medical community was not nearly as technologically advanced. You all need to remember that there is a significant portion of time between extraction and transplantation. The organ must therefore be kept alive and healthy for the entire journey. Due to this, we prioritize location. If there was an addict who matched in our region, they would receive an organ before someone in another state because it is safer and more reliable. Moving forward, I know that a lot of you aren't interested in the boring and complicated system of transplantation, blah, blah, blah. But yesterday, my opponent argued on the side of science. According to her, an alcoholic will simply not survive the transplantation, or at the very least will reject the organ, which is when the body sees the new organ as a foreign invader and kills it. Her argument focused heavily on rejection, but there is no data to support this. A study by the National Institute of Health found that between 6 months and 3 years after transplant operations, a small 9% of alcoholic patients had returned to drinking at a level symptomatic of alcoholism. Only 14% recorded some type of alcohol consumption. By comparison, 46% of a non-alcoholic group of liver transplant patients reported drinking socially. The survival rates between alcoholics and non-alcoholics have no significant differences. I'm going to repeat myself. There was no difference in organ survival rates between alcoholics and non-alcoholics. Ms. Basile says we have to put our good foot forward, but as far as I can tell, we Americans stand on 2 good legs. As I said yesterday, there's absolutely no medical basis to deny care to former alcoholics. At the end of the day, whether my opponent wants to admit it or not, this is a moral argument. When looking at morality of allowing an alcoholic to receive an organ, there are 2 main sides. 1, we are enabling an addict to continue their addiction. As I mentioned earlier, only about 9% of alcoholics returning to drinking after transplantation. Other studies on various forms of substance abuse have reported similar findings, with the conclusion that transplantation can be successful with a history of addiction. The second argument is that addicts did this to themselves and should therefore suffer the consequences. But how can we be sure that their need for a transplant was from the addiction? For example, I probably have one of the worst diets here. My breakfast this morning consisted of an undisclosed number of chocolate chip cookies. With my habits, I could become a diabetic in 10 years or so. Was it my eating? Maybe. But diabetes has several causes, including age, race, and even pregnancy. We can make as many assumptions as we want, but there's no way of actually knowing. Just like how there's no way of knowing if a cocaine addict got a heart attack because of his addiction or because he has a family history of heart disease. At the end of the day, addiction is not a choice. Substance use disorders are heritable, and influenced by complex interactions among multiple genes and environmental factors. Because genetic predisposition plays such an important role in addiction, certain groups of people have a higher prevalence of addiction. American Indian or Alaskan Native people were found to be the most likely to have a tobacco addiction. More than half of all white people were found to suffer from alcohol addiction. Addiction, obesity, and smoking are all more prevalent in areas of high poverty. Addiction can happen to anyone, but it affects certain groups of people more than others. A vote towards Ms. Basile's platform is a vote towards discrimination. It's a vote to kill people whose only crime was a gene that they were born with. It's a vote to kill your neighbor, your friend, your family. I'm fighting to give people a second chance. I'm fighting to protect equal rights. Join me in the fight. Be the avalanche of change, and vote SNOW.
Ms. Basile, you may ask your question.
On average, 55,000 people a year are left unhelped on the current transplant list, as well as an average of 6,200 people that will die before they can receive an organ. So based on these statistics and your refusal to condense the qualification criteria, how do you suggest we close this gap?
I think that there is no current solution to close the gap. Whether or not you allow addicts to be on the organ donation list or not, you're going to be killing those people. Those people, the addicts and alcoholics that you're banning from the list, will die and will further contribute. So by separating them from the list, you're only adding to those statistics and killing more people.
Ms. Basile, you have 7 minutes.
Everybody raise your hand. Put your hand down. Have you ever bit off more than you can chew? Well, when this happens, you have two options: spit it out or choke. Right now, the American transplant system is choking on over 103,000 people, waiting for life-saving organs to become available. Then this number grows larger by the day, and we're going to suffocate if we do not establish stricter criteria, starting with alcoholics and drug abusers. Hi, my name is Corinne Basile, and I am running for the House of Representatives on behalf of the Safari Party alongside my campaign manager, Bridget Duffy. Imagine you're a basketball coach, and if you come out with another losing season, you're fired. During tryouts, 30 talented, hard-working players show up, but you can only take 12 on the team. It is a tough decision because every guy who showed up deserves a spot on the team, but there isn't enough gym time or adequate resources. It is a tough decision because every guy who showed up deserves a spot. But if you don't win the season, remember, you are out of the job. So you choose the players that are going to give you the best possible chance of winning. It is not because the other players were bad, but rather the top 12 are faster, taller, more accurate, and know the game better. You had to hurt some feelings, but in the end, you did what was best for your team as a whole. The same concept can be applied to addicts being removed from the transplant list criteria. Essentially, by accepting almost everybody, we're helping almost nobody. Only 46,632 transplants took place in the year 2023, which is only half of this outrageous demand. And not to mention, 1/3 of organ transplants fail, according to the HRSA. This is such a meticulous operation that we must reduce these numbers to truly make it effective. Just like your basketball team, it isn't that the addicts don't deserve organs, or that this is any retribution for their actions. Unfortunately, they're just not the prime candidates for organ transplantation right now. You may be thinking, if this isn't a punishment for their previous behaviors, then why addicts? Well, contrary to my opponent's belief that I don't think they deserve organs, we chose to look at the medical analysis and logistics of receiving an organ. Frankly, in her speech, Ms. Baxter made more false accusations about my morality than she did arguments in her favor. So let's dive into the facts. There are two main reasons for this decision. One, unstandardized criteria, and two, post-operational circumstances. First, unstandardized criteria comes from the Community Ethics Committee, which is a group of professionals who are responsible for choosing. As of now, there are so many factors that contribute to their decision. that reducing the amount would make this process much more efficient. This decision process also takes time, and in these situations, time is of the essence. Contrary to Ms. Baxter's perfect world, the span these organs can survive outside the body does not leave much time for debate. Lungs only last 4 to 6 hours, and a liver on average 8. In other words, this is the time span of a school day to make life-saving decisions. The whole point of having legislation regarding organ transplantation is to establish objective and reasonable criteria, and it's time to do just that. Since this is not discrimination-based, let me explain why addicts are the target for this implementation. Well, addiction is a disease, as overconsumption changes the brain chemistry. Addiction is extremely dependent on a person's environment, family history, and many other contributing factors. As a whole, addicts struggle to meet the standard psychosocial criteria. The reason recovered alcoholics never drink again isn't just because the party days are over. It is because their brain builds irreversible pathways that cannot be undone, and they have given their brain the ability to take over their body. This becomes a problem with transplants because the body enters rejection, whether you're an addict or not, after receiving an organ. Rejection is when your body naturally detects the organ is not yours and tries to eliminate it, kind of like it would attack an infection. To avoid rejection, the variety of pills that must be taken several times a day is quite literally a matter of life and death. Not to mention, the reliance on these drugs is an easy way to fuel a substance abuse relapse. People may change, but your brain chemistry does not. And addicts are not the ideal candidates for this regimented and disciplined commitment. Ladies and gentlemen, not only was my moral integrity challenged on things I did not say, but Ms. Baxter also accused me of infringing on your amended rights. So let's talk about it. I know the Bill of Rights can be tricky, but allow me to break it down for you. Ms. Baxter claimed that this restriction is a violation of both the 8th and 14th Amendments, but that is simply untrue. The 8th Amendment declares that there shall be no cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. As I've said many times before, this is not a punishment. There is a stigma regarding addicts in our society, but in this circumstance, they let standard qualifications for a medical procedure go by. This brings me to the 14th Amendment, which provides equal civil and legal rights to citizens. I hate to be the one to break it to you, but you do not have the right to another person's organ. The fact that my opposition has this much entitlement for addicts, but chooses to overlook the people currently being neglected on this overpopulated system speaks volumes. It is not fair that everyone cannot get an organ transplant, but life isn't fair sometimes, and it's time to face the facts. The people with the highest chance of living successfully have just become another number, wondering if they'll even make it to their next birthday. Over 103,000 people need our help. And even if you cannot donate a liver or lung, you can vote for me and in favor of the Safari Party to give these people a real second hope. Thank you.
Ms. Baxter, you may ask your question.
Recently, a popular artist revealed that he had been sober for 16 years. Some of the people in this room have not been alive for 16 years. How can you punish a person who has been sober for longer than you have been alive?
Thank you for your question. So I am 18,
Oh, sorry.
but
My apologies.
on a separate note, I would like to mention, maybe for the 4th time, that addiction never really leaves your body. You build irreversible pathways in your brain. Similar to how they tell you you'll never forget how to ride a bike, your brain never really forgets an addiction. Again, this is not a punishment. We're dealing with limited resources. We have to put our best foot forward. And somebody who has damaged the pathways in their brain the way an addict has just isn't ideal for us right now. Not a punishment, just what we have to deal with. Thank you.
We're going to take two questions from the audience.
Kelly Olsen, don't tell.
This question is for the snow party. Typically with substance abusers, more than one organ is usually affected. For example, smoking affects the heart, lungs, and brain and other internal organs. Would there be certain guidelines in place for addicts with multiple organ failure?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of other diseases also affect multiple organs, so there's already procedures and standards in place for multiple organ failure. In most cases, it goes in list of medical urgency, which I mentioned in my speech. So if you were most likely to immediately die from, let's say, heart failure, you would get a heart transplant first. And because of how the organ donation process works, it's difficult to get organs in general because you need an exact genetic match, which is why by letting more people onto it, you're basically going to get a higher chance of matches, for example. But in this case, they would get as many organs as they could possibly match to. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay.
This question is for the safari party.
What am I looking at?
All doctors have to swear a pledge known as the Hippocratic Oath, which is based on principles of treating patients and healing them regardless of their background. So is declining organ donations to drug abusers not against the moral principles that doctors swore upon?
Yes, thank you. I'm really, really glad you brought this up because the Hippocratic Oath does not apply in this situation because by refusing an organ, you're not refusing medical treatment. That's the thing. Nowhere in the Hippocratic Oath does it declare that you need to give everybody an organ that needs an organ. There are other ways to go about organ failure, especially for the people that right now don't qualify for the organ donation list. So you could live on dialysis, and this doesn't exclude private donation. So if I was excluded from the donation list for whatever reason, and I had a family member that was willing to donate, I would be fully capable of doing that. I just don't qualify for the general list. So this isn't refusing medical treatment, therefore there is no violation. Thank you.
We're going to invite all the speakers and campaign managers up to the stage. Floor is open to questions from the audience.
Good afternoon. This question is for the safari party, specifically substance users and organ transplants. So I'm curious how the idea of neuroplasticity comes into the decision not to give substance users transplants, simply because if the basis is on the idea that brain chemistry doesn't change, that would be false. And I only say that because the idea that brain chemistry does change is why people who suffer from depression can eventually get over it. And that's why combat veterans can enjoy fireworks without having a flashback. So it does take time. It is very hard. But I just, I think at some point, the character perspective of substance use is part of the play to not give them organ transplants. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. So the only reason we're excluding addicts to begin with is just because of priority. So it's not that addicts aren't capable of changing their brain chemistry along with anybody else. It's just the fact that that their brain chemistry has changed, they're not our primary candidates. Right now, with the gap on this list, there's 60,000 people currently, as of right now, on this list who have yet to have a phone call even with a consultation. So we need to limit the criteria of who we're adding, how many people we add, and this is just a start. So it's nothing personal, it's nothing against the change of brain chemistry, it's just putting our best foot forward. Thank you.
So this is for the safari party. Should individuals with a history of addiction be required to demonstrate a period of sobriety before being considered eligible for a transplant?
No, they shouldn't be considered at all. Thank you.
The chair would look favorably upon a question for the snow party.
Yeah, right here. For the snow party, at the end of the day, picking up a drink and drinking it, buying drugs and using them are all choices. So why is it that we let abusers into a list that just runs the risk of perpetuating a cycle of dependency and irresponsible behavior?
I think that that is a great question, but as I said in my speech, and as even my opponent has admitted, addiction is not a choice, and even to be considered, as we've said before, there is a process to apply to be on the organ donation list, and for most hospitals, you have to be sober for at least 6 months. So it's 6 months sobriety, which I said yesterday, will lead to about a 60% lower chance of an addict relapsing into their disease. So basically by proving this, it's more likely that they won't relapse. And in most cases, they don't, which I also have data in my speech. I think that's dead.
We have time for one more question.
It's so bright. Forgot.
So this is for, I believe your name was Bridget, right? Yes. So as life expectancy increases, would this age maximum for like being a president be raised along with the life expectancy increasing?
That's a great question. So I just want to point out again that when the initial amendment for the age minimum was made of 35, the life expectancy was only 40 years old. So our founding fathers only intended for such a small window. And I think with my window from 35 to 70, it's big enough, and I'm using science to back that up. So right now, with the average cognitive decline being 70 years old, I think that this is a good cap. But if in the future this decline is further along, I think that I'd be open to amending it.
Thank you for coming. Move to block 6. Voting starts Monday.